Over here.
Yeah, I guess this question is kind of providential to the answer you just gave. I think you would all agree that between the three of you, you all unite around the gospel of Christ. And Reformed theology is known for being doctrinal theology. It places a great stress on doctrine. What do you do in a church when, as I know you three, if you talked long enough, some of the differences in doctrinal perspectives would begin to surface? Dr. MacArthur's dispensationalism, R.C. Sproul's covenant theology, there would be some issues over maybe eschatology and other things that you unite together, but yet you're divided in certain areas. How do you deal with that when it happens in a body? Because I've seen churches split over it. And what do you do?
Well, since I'm the odd man out here with these covenantalists,
that's true, actually.
I just want you to understand this. That what we disagree on is minimal. And much of it has to do with eschatology. And I am humbled eschatologically by the words of Peter, who said that even the prophets in the Old Testament looked at what they wrote to understand what person and what time they were talking about. So when you're talking eschatologically, you decide that you're going to interpret eschatological passages either in one way or another, but we all understand that we are humbled by the reality that what hasn't happened yet cannot be fully known, especially when much of the passages that are eschatological are on visionary form and other than just simple, straightforward historical statements. So, but that's the future. So I think with that and maybe a few other ecclesiological issues, we would differ, but 98% of the things that the Scripture teaches, we affirm together, all the way, certainly all the way from theology proper through bibliology, sweeping through soteriology, Christology, pneumatology, hamartiology, angelology. I mean, we come all the way down, and finally we get into ecclesiology, and maybe we talk about the baptismal mode and all of that kind of thing, and then we get to eschatology, and there's some dividing points at that juncture. I've tried to minimize those in my understanding of Scripture by asking not to be referred to as a dispensationalist, because that's a buzz term. In fact, Gerstner said one time that I was the only dispensationalist he ever met that didn't take it to its logical conclusions. Because he said that at our seminary when he was giving a series there. He couldn't understand me because it bothered him that I didn't have consistent logical powers. He was afraid of where I was going to end up. If it wasn't going to be where all dispensationals end up, it would be some other tragic place.
The scary thing about your question to me is the worst thing you can possibly do in light of the reality that doctrine at times does divide is to flee from doctrine. That's like saying the truth of God doesn't matter, and God forbid that we should ever set it forth in our church, because if somebody gets upset or offended, we're going to have a split. A church that never cares about doctrine is a dead church. Okay?
But I think some people use doctrine as a big club, and they beat people up with it. And I think as a pastor, you encourage the faint-hearted, you help the weak, you exhibit enduring macrothemia, patience. We have a doctrinal statement at our church, and it's 14, 15 pages long. We call it What We Teach. We don't call it What We Believe, because we don't all believe it yet. And so we don't say to someone, you have to sign this doctrinal statement to come into this church, because I don't want to spend my whole life preaching what I believe to people who already believe it. That's redundant. I know all these people are in process. All we want to have people say is, are you willing to submit yourself to the instruction that's going to be built on this? So I think it's being irenic, it's being gracious, it's following the patience of Christ as he endeavored to communicate with his apostles, who were blockheads, as we all know, and he was going back over the same thing again and again. I think it's the patience and the love. It's the 1 Corinthians 13 attitude, and it's I know there's a side of me that only, you hear a sermon and you read a book and you would think maybe that Grace Church was a pretty hard-nosed place. Our doctrine is clear and we don't hesitate to proclaim it, but the church should be pervaded by the patient love of its leadership to let people be in the process, that the Spirit of God is working in their hearts with the truth being taught to them to bring them to that place of conviction. If you go into a church and slam dunk Reformed theology on people's heads, you're going to cause a fight, because people have reason to believe what they believe. Somebody told them this was the truth of God, and it's sacred to them. And there's definitely a process in letting people move along, and you want to make sure that there's openness and generosity and graciousness in the proclamation of these truths without wavering on the truths themselves.
Thank you. Very wise answer.